Namaskar. Today's lecture is going to be on donative inscriptions in Indian history, the content and format. Generally speaking, inscription record falls under the category of archaeological sources, but because of their importance, it is treated as a separate category because of the precision of their information. Archaeologists struggling with the Pompeii syndrome feel often lucky if they come across some written records during their exploration or excavation. In many cases, it is possible to determine the date, authorship, location, etc. in inscription records. This helps them deduce meaningful information in a region or a time period. So far as classification of inscription is considered, there are many ways of classifying inscriptions. These can be classified on the basis of the surface on which these are engraved, length of the text, information contained in an inscription, language and script used in the inscriptions, the age or era which is mentioned in these inscriptions, dynasty, regions, etc. etc. They can also be classified into official and private records depending on whose behalf they were issued or inscribed. Inscriptions are further classified according to the content and purpose into types such as donative, dedicative and commemorative inscriptions. So far as inscriptions, specifically donative inscriptions in Indo-Aryan languages is considered, inscription categories are not exclusive and they are also to some extent arbitrary. Different scholars uses different arrangements depending upon the requirement of their research project, and no one formulation can be considered definitive. In fact, scholars turns out to be quite innovative in this regard. Majority of the epigraphic material available in Indian scripts falls under two categories, donative and panegyric records. This can again further be classified into royal and private inscriptions. However, so far the full range of the contents and is considered is very broad. There exist various combinations of these inscriptions and sometimes these overlaps. None of these categories are completely distinct or exclusive. Purely eulogistic, purely donative or panegyric inscriptions are rarely found in Indian history. Well, we cannot think of the donative inscriptions before the idea itself. So far as act of donation is considered, is supposed to be the idea of piety, an act of holiness, righteousness. It is generally believed that people who make a donation are altruistic in their nature. In other words, they are supposed to be acting in an unselfish manner and works for the welfare of others. However, many donees are not shy of making the objective of their donation public. Royal inscriptions in fact are found to be very laudatory and eulogistic in this regard. Donative inscription in favor of religious establishments were inscribed on shrine walls, railings and gateways. The excavations and donations of caves to ascetics was recorded in inscriptions in the caves. Donative inscriptions include records of installations of religious images, often inscribed on themselves. There are other records, investments of money made by people out of interest of which lamps, flowers, incense, etc. were supposed to be provided to the worship of deity. In Indian history, so far as the development of the notion of donation is considered, you cannot trace it before the early Vedic period. We won't come across any donative inscriptions prior to this. The most familiar term which is available in Indian literature is dan. Dana, which is used in the sense of donation, and in its extended sense, it implies bestowing upon someone not only movable and immovable objects, but also persons, the training which one receives from his or her teacher. It will be anachronistic to talk about donative inscriptions before the popularity of idea of making donation itself. The aims and objective of the Vedic religious practices are materialistic in nature. The period is marked by public ritual performances and after which priests received a fee in return of duties performed by him in the capacity of ritual specialist. The idea of making donation is not very significant in this literature. In the later text, we find priests expecting more and more gifts in the form of dakshina. Land came to be included in the list which priests expected at this juncture, and the tone is very, very greedy in the later literature. It was perhaps the development of the Shramanic ideas which led to the popularity of the donations as an act of merit. Shramanic communities who were dependent upon their very existence on the patronage rendered by laity were most active in this regard. On one hand, they talk about non-possession, non-hoarding. Simultaneously, it was the question of their very existence, since they were roaming from one place to another and dependent upon the very survival on the support rendered to them by individual as well as royalty. The development of karma theory is again very crucial for the spread of idea of making a donation. Good actions were supposed to be believed to improving one's station in this life and the future life. People who performed good actions were supposed to be elevating their social as well as economic status. They could have expected material benefits in the next path. The idea of the transfer of karma again is very, very significant. One could have improvised one's future or even the present by making certain good actions, and those good actions then could have been associated even with their deceased, their forefathers, etc., etc. So the idea of transfer of karma is very, very significant. It became popular in Indian society, and people sometimes indulge into this practice because they wanted to help their deceased ancestors. So far as scripts, language and style is considered, these donative inscriptions at times turns out to be multi-script and multilingual inscriptions. Most of the time, functional portion of these inscriptions are in local languages or script. Use of bilingual or trilingual inscriptions is usually found in the transient zone where speakers of many languages or practitioners of many scripts conversed. And in this manner, these inscriptions are helpful in tracing the history of certain languages or the development of certain scripts. The range of donative inscriptions is immense. Many of them, especially the one which records the donation made by individuals, are very brief and unadorned. Usually private inscriptions are of this sort. On the other hand, we have certain elaborate inscriptions which are quasi-literary or sometimes very, very ornate. There are several inscriptions of the royal category which are of this type. So far as royal donative and panegyric inscriptions are considered, these are usually in the form of donative proclamations and panegyrics issued by an individual who himself perhaps was king or one of his relative. These usually sings the prashasti, that is eulogy of the individual, his dynasty, and are engraved on the surfaces, on the temple walls, caves, etc., etc. Stylistically, royal donative panegyric records are lofty and ornate. Usually, they are quite poetic in style. The objective was to eulogize the ruler. Despite their largely panegyric content and tone, most of the inscriptions are hardly purely eulogistic. In fact, they comes in mixed variety. We don't have any purely panegyric inscript or purely official record available in the Indian history. So far as the contents of royal donative inscriptions is considered, most of these royal donative inscriptions can describe. Here is a checklist, and some of them or all of them can be available in any royal donative record. It usually describes the description of king's achievements year by year. They praise rulers on the occasion of particular foundation or donation. They talks about the details of king's victories. They make proclamation concerning the measures which rulers took in a particular area, and dedication of waterworks and wells. But most of the time, these inscriptions are religious in their content. They are dedications to deities, erection of certain pillar, excavation of caves to monks and nuns, etc. etc. At times, we have investments of money made out of interest, of which lamps, flowers, incense, etc. were to be provided for the worship of the deity. These inscriptions also record construction and dedication of caves to monastic orders, and at times they also seem to be making provision for the clothing of these people as well as a maintenance grant or stipend for them. So this range definitely is very immense. We have a special kind of donative inscription, which is land grants or land charters, which were, so far as the Indian history goes, usually meant for the temples, cultic centers, or to individuals usually belonging to Brahmin category. Royal inscriptions follow a certain format. A typical royal inscription begins with an auspicious sign, that is Siddham or Swastishri, which may be followed by a Mangal verse, which is invocatory in nature. Further, there can be certain formulaic verse from a text which praises the act of donation, its benefits, etc. etc. It is followed by an account of ruling king's lineages. It's full of lavish praise of the individual mentioned in the inscriptions, his forefathers, his forefathers. Sometimes this praise can go to the extent of physical powers, prowess, quality, etc. possessed by that individual, and the kind of rule which prevailed under him. His just rule, actions, conquest, etc. are usually referred in these portions. The actual purpose of the inscription comes only towards the end of these inscriptions, and it may be very brief at time. Then comes the concluding portions, where we have certain benedictory and signature verses, again followed by certain formulaic verses from certain oft quoted texts such as say Manusmriti, Vyasa, etc. etc. Well, of course, this format developed only gradually. The earlier inscriptions in Indian history are very original, and individual writers have displayed their skills. But later on, we have this format which was generally repeated, only the place names and the details, internal details, the function details changed. Otherwise, it was kind of legal documents which was repeated. We have several blank donative records also, upon whom the internal details were supposed to be filled as and when required. Land grants or land charters are a special kind of donative records, and they constitute a subfield within Indian epigraphy. Such inscriptions are usually engraved on one or more copper plates, but at times they can occur on a stone surface which was near a temple or near a field. To begin with, initially non-epigraphic material was used for the composition of these inscriptions, and then these details were copied on a stone surface or on copper plate. This can include palm leaves, birch strips, etc. etc. The usual purpose of the copper plate inscription is to record donations, usually by the kings and their functionaries of villages, or somewhat less commonly the cultivated fields to Brahmanas who are felt to be especially deserving by virtue of their learning or holiness. At times, many of these land charters also record endowments made to temples or other religious institutions, and copies in stone of inscription of this type are frequently found engraved on the walls of temples. In fact, most of the southern Indian temples are littered with such inscription records. A typical land charter is supposed to be having following characteristics. It can be divided into three forms. Number one is preamble, then comes notification of the grant, and then conclusion. Each three of these can then have several other sections. As mentioned earlier, any inscription usually begins with an invocatory sign, Siddham or Swasti Shri, fortune and invocation. Then any inscription, land charter mention the place of the issue. Usually it is supposed to be the capital city, but sometimes it can also be the royal camp. Kings were always on the move, and sometimes they could have issued a royal charter from the place where they were encamped. The term used for such places is Jai Skandhavar. Sometimes only the name is mentioned, but at times other details such as the flora and fauna around that place is also referred. Then comes the details of the grantor's names and his genealogy. Historically, this is the most significant section because of the details involved there. When the writing of Indian history began somewhere around the 19th century, a great deal of content of genealogical nature was used by the scholars. The next section of these donative inscription is addresses, the details of the addressee. The officials who were supposed to execute the details or the orders of the inscriptions are found there. Usually we have technical words such as say Bodhaiti or Agyapati mentioned in these inscriptions. The names, the offices and the location of the people is clearly indicated. Then comes the notification part. The details of the grants are mentioned here. The specification of the gifts involves the measurements, the boundaries, etc. It also contains the name of the grantees, his genealogy, and again there is a lot of scope for a person to indulge into personal praise of the gotra or the sect to which a particular person, that is grantee, belonged to. Donative inscriptions also mention the occasion on which a particular grant was made. It can be an important festival in a region. It can also be Sakranti, that is solar passage. It can be an auspicious occasion of other importance. Usually this section also mentions the intention and the function of a particular grant, why this grant was given, whether donee is expected long life or kirti for himself, to his forefathers, or certain other benefits. Lastly comes the concluding parts of the inscription. Here we have a very important section called exhortation. Well, rulers realized that their rule is not going to last long, but then they promised that the contents of the inscriptions are applicable till the moon and the sun last. The date of this inscription is usually mentioned in the regnal year, and sometime the name of the ruler helps ascertain the chronologies, the political chronologies. So far as the private donative records are concerned, they will name the ruler who was ruling when this donation was made. Finally, the names of the officers and functionaries who were supposed to execute the details are mentioned. Lastly comes the authentication part of it. Usually kings or the grantees will come up with this phrase Swahasto Mam Likhitam. This was written by my own hand or signed by my own hand. So far as private donative records are concerned, there's a great range of these records. Many of them are very brief, such as say the one which are available to us from the stupa complex of Sanchi or Bharhut. But then there are others which seems to be imitating the royal Prashasti styles, such as say the inscriptions available at Mandsaur Sun Temple, which were written almost in eulogistic style, where we have the praise of a particular guild being sung by its writer. Like royal inscription, a typical private inscription also contain several details, such as say the date, usually in regnal year, of the contemporary king, or the other method of reckoning which was popular in that particular region. Then the names of the donors, his titles, occupation, etc., and place of his residence will follow. The nature of the donation and endowment again is mentioned. Its intention and purpose sometimes can be mentioned, why a donor was donating this, what benefits he expected from this, etc., etc. Private donative records are highly diverse in their content, character, and style. Sometimes these are very ornate in style. The objectives of these donations are very similar to the royal inscriptions. Private inscription records the dedication of the tanks, wells, drinking places, etc. The temples or endowment to temples are for repairs, maintenance of the daily rituals, activities. Caves for monastic residences, images of deities, villages or agricultural land, and so forth. So far as the historical use of the donative inscription is considered, inscriptions are not essentially historical document, but rather donative or panegyric records, and they only incidentally refer to historical information. Thus, the standard of objectivity, precision, and comprehensiveness which one expects from the modern standards of historical writing are absent from these records. Hence, the contextual analysis of these inscription is very necessary. No inscription should be read at its individual face value. One should always place them in a particular context. One should make compare contrast of the inscription available from a particular region or locality. We have several clusters such as Sanchi, Bharhut, Nalanda, etc., where such attempts are very much possible. Several scholars have gleaned all sorts of information from these inscriptions, such as say the one by Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay, where he has tried to understand the irrigation practices in a dry region such as say Rajasthan only on the basis of the inscriptions, donative inscription in that area. We have certain other scholars who have tried to make sense of kinship terminologies and the relationship between household mode and ascetic mode on the basis of inscription records. So the range of possible uses of these inscriptions are immense. Scholars keep coming with new studies based upon these donative inscriptions. It's always an exercise worth doing. Thank you.